Hey everyone, in this training, let's talk about how we can use training aids to change motor control. And basically, that's a fancy way of saying how do we improve the way our horse moves. I'm going to use my own horse, Pangloss, as an example. Just a real quick background, I'm Shelly Thomas. I'm a physical therapist, and my company is Intrepid Wellness. My mission is helping horses and riders move and perform better. And my horse Pangloss was, I'm not going to go into this super depth in this video, but he sustained a pretty complicated SI injury in the fall of 2021. So, really spent the fall of 2021 and most of 2022 rehabbing from that injury. I had to really ask myself, like, why it happened, what parts of my program might have contributed to it. I had to go way, way back and question everything. How was I asking him to move? Did I have the proper foundation laid? What exercises was I putting in to help him out? How was I advancing him? Et cetera, to try to figure out how to help this horse be able to do his job better. Which this horse at the time was an eventer. I think he's still going to be an eventer, but as we've come through this rehab, I think, you have to be very open and say what works for your body. So we're now out of rehab mode. We're into like training and performance mode, and we're going to see what 2023 brings and go from there. But I want to show you how training aids can be used to improve how your horse moves and the importance of using training aids. I know there's a lot of controversy out there about how training aids kind of force horses to move a certain way and perhaps create artificial changes in range of motion, that kind of thing. But they can be an extremely good tool. And I hope this training is going to give you a little insight into why they're useful. So this is Pangloss in January of 2022. So his injury came to light at the very end of October 2021. So here we are about 3 months later. We're doing a lot of flat work. And I just took this static picture because I want you just to look at his overall shape. Okay. So, and really what I want you to pay attention to is his pelvis and his hind leg. Okay. So his pelvis is in that position. And then as he's stepping up underneath himself, his hind leg comes that far under his body. And I'm going to show you some video of this later, and you'll see in the video he's also not quite straight. Okay. He's not truly on two tracks. Fast forward, there's been a lot of rehab work done with this horse. And one of the things he's done very consistently is work on the lunge line at the walk, actually very little trot and canter, tons of walking on a lunge line, in the equibands, and then he started in Vienna reins and graduated to side reins. I'll talk about that more later. But fast forward to April of 2023, and this is what he looks like. And I want you to, hopefully you can appreciate the differences. His carriage is more elevated through his shoulders. He has a better quality of neck flexion. He's got a little bit more like posterior tilt and kind of tuck of his pelvis. And then the thing I really want you to notice is this hind leg. Look at how this hind leg is coming and stepping through and under his body. And again, I'll show videos of this later, but he is also moving much straighter in terms of he's on two tracks or darn near close to it, where this is still a work in progress. Okay. Let's just show those pictures side by side so you can really kind of clarify and cement this in your mind. So we've got, this is on the left, we've got January 2022, and on the right, April 2023. Lots of rehab work, hours spent walking. And I'm going to talk about why the walk here in a bit, but walking in training aids to improve his motor control and mechanics. So you really appreciate how his hind leg is stepping up differently underneath his body and how he's able to rotate his pelvis much better, like rotate it back and get underneath himself. How we improve movement is we change motor control. Okay. I know that's like a big mouthful, but when someone says my horse is moving better, what they're really saying to you is, I've done a lot of work, whether it's through making him comfortable or training or fitness or improving my skill set, but I've done work of some sort to make it that when I ask my horse to do a movement, he is activating his muscles, he's activating his nervous system, and he's using his body in a more effective way for my sport. And all of that can be summed up by saying, you improve a horse's movement by changing their motor control. I improve movement by improving motor control. Let's look at the video of Pan. So these are the 2 times on the left, January 2022, on the right, April 2023. And look at how he's got, again, focus on that hind leg. Look at the step in his hind leg and how it's coming back underneath him so much better. And the video on the right compared to the video on the left. See, on the left, he's like stilted, kind of stabbing the ground with those hind legs. He's not able to lift his back as well. He's not able to step underneath himself. Sorry, I have to make the video kind of trick it. And under the right, he's got much better core engagement, belly lift, posterior tilt of his pelvis, and can step further underneath himself. So let's talk about what influences motor control, right? It's not, you don't just like walk out the door and go, today I'm going to change motor control. You've got to help your horse move better, you've got to make sure the foundation gets laid properly so that then you can use like some therapeutic exercises and training tools to shape how he moves differently, he or she moves differently. So what influences motor control? Lots of things. Range of motion, muscle activation patterns, strength, endurance or lack thereof, right? So fatigue, habits. I could have like perfectly normal strength. Your horse could have perfectly normal strength, perfectly normal range of motion, and just has the habit of like throwing his head in the air and kind of popping up with his front end instead of engaging his hind limbs when he goes from the walk to the trot, even though he's perfectly capable of pushing off better. There's nothing physically wrong with him. It's just a habit he developed. Body angles. So here we're talking hoof angles and just flat out conformation. Like if I have a horse who's, you know, a little bit cowhocked or over at the knee or something like that, that's a genetic thing. I'm not going to be able to change that. And the way the forces move through his body is somewhat set. Comfort or lack thereof, right? So if a horse is uncomfortable, whether it's like a little bit of uncomfortable or all the way up into the pain spectrum, they're going to move differently to avoid that pain or minimize that pain. And then previous injuries might be causing some restrictions. So all of those things come together into this big pot that mixes together and determines how your horse moves. We can influence some of these we can't influence. But those we can influence, we should try to do so through quality veterinary care, quality strengthening, quality training programs, that kind of thing. Okay, so this comes to the point about training aids. To change a movement pattern, you need at least 3 points of control. And you're going to be like, what? What are you talking about? Think about it that if I want to shoot an arrow, right? I've got to take that arrow, I've got to connect it into the bow. I've got to pull back and bend the bow to basically like trap some energy and change the shape of that bow. And then I'm going to release it and let that energy come forward. If I want to bend the bow, I can't just go and pick up the bow on one end and then hold the arrow to it. Like nothing happens, right? I've got to have at least 3 points of control in order to change the shape of something. So in the case of bending the bow, my 3 points of control are the stiffness of the bow itself, right? The bow is one point of control. It's got a certain amount of stiffness and a certain amount of flexibility to it. And then say my left hand on the bottom of the bow and my right hand on the top of the bow allows me to bend that bow. So there's my 3 points of control. The stiffness inherent in the bow itself, my right hand, my left hand. Boom, I can bend it, I can contain energy, I can reshape that system. Okay. So think about when you're riding your horse, right? So I'm asking my horse to, I want just to trot in a straight line, but I'm asking him to go on the bit, lift his back, and engage on that straight line, right? So what are my points of control? It's a little bit like the bow. One point of control is, there's actually probably more than 3 in this scenario. I'm going to give you 3, but the horse itself is a point of control, right? His body has inherent stiffness, flexibility, energy, and movement to it. So that is one point of control. I'm going to keep this simple. We really could break that down into more. But another point of control is my hands, right? I can pull on the bit. And then another point I have control is my leg. I can add leg to encourage him to like lift his belly and step up under and engage. So between my hands, my legs, and the horse itself, I can shape that horse into like a more lifted and elevated system that has a little bit of bow to it that allows the horse to carry me better, engage his back, lift his spine, and carry me better, and then be a better athlete. So when we're talking about changing the movement patterns, I'm not just going to go and put a halter on my horse and walk him around and change movement patterns. I can use training aids to change movement patterns. So training aids are anything that I'm going to use as a point of control to cause the horse to basically adjust his body. Bits, nosebands, side reins, equibands, Pessoa systems, Vienna reins, martingales, draw reins. I know this isn't a comprehensive list, but when used properly, and I put that in all capital letters, and I really want you to pay attention to that and, dig deep into like, how do I use these things properly? Can alter how a horse moves and improve their range of motion, muscle activation patterns, strength, and help them create new habits. Training tools are not the devil. They are a really effective way to change motor control when used properly. So what things should you look at before you ever put a training aid on a horse? Like before I walk up to a horse and slap side reins on him, what are the things that I need to think about? All right. I need to think, does my horse have enough range of motion to do this task? Let's say my horse has been in a trailering accident and has a bad neck injury, right? Like their neck is just spasming. They cannot bend their neck. They can't like flex at the pole or look to the right because of the way that impact. We've x-rayed them and the bones and stuff are okay, but like their muscles are so tight and spasming. I mean, that horse is really lacking range of motion. You're not going to go slap side reins on that horse. You're not going to be like, well, I'm going to tie your head down and ask you to like flex and walk on the lunge line, right? You have to make sure they have enough range of motion to doing the task that you are asking them to do. Is your horse comfortable? If they are in any discomfort or pain, this is really not the time for training aids. There's a tiny exception to that sometimes to break a pain cycle, we've got to like start some muscle activation patterns, but that's really something that you're going to leave to the hands of a professional, right? Or to either work with the horse or work with you and your horse and guide you as to like, how do you very carefully put constraints on a system, even though we know your horse isn't fully comfortable, right? But so generally when we're talking about using training aids to change movement patterns, like for performance, the horse needs to be 100% comfortable to do it. Do the training aids fit properly? And then are the aids even doing what you want them to do? Like if you want your horse to learn to, like in Pangloss's case, step underneath himself and do a better posterior tilt with his pelvis and engage his core and lift his belly more effectively and activate those serratus ventralis muscles under his shoulder and lift his shoulders up Am I even putting an aid on him that helps out that job? And so you really have to study the aids that you are going to use and know when to use them, why to use them, how much pressure you need to put on them, that kind of stuff. So those are the things you're going to think about before you ever put an aid on your horse. Then, while you're using a training aid, you have to consider a bunch of things too. So I put the training aids on my horse. I'm watching him like walk on the lunge line in this aid, right? In Pangloss's case, in the equibands, and then a constraint system up front, either the Vienna rein or you advance to the side reins. I've got to keep asking myself these questions over and over again. And if the answer, if I get to where I'm like, I don't think this aid is doing what I want it to do, I don't think it's giving me what I want it to give, I just need to stop my session, take it off, and adjust. Maybe I need to go switch to something else. Maybe I thought my horse had the range of motion to do the job, but after I put him in this aid, I'm like, oh, you don't have the range of motion I think you do. We got to go back to the drawing board of like some more basic rehab stuff before we can really work on changing your movement. Like, you have to be able to be really cognitively flexible when you use training aids. And sometimes a horse is struggling a little bit in a training aid, but you have to let them see the struggle through, because what the training aids are doing with the 3-point of control is they're really helping change how they activate muscles. But sometimes to do that, you have to actually kind of bend fascia a little bit. You've got to like get the body to warm up and find how to use that range of motion and like move the rib cage, move the shoulders, and move the hips a little bit. That doesn't always happen in 10 steps. Sometimes you have to be like, I'm confident you have the range of motion. I'm confident you can activate your muscles like to do this properly. You just need to practice. And so you're going to let them see the struggle through. But things to think about while you're using the training aid is think little and often. Frequency is really important with training aids. Like if I'm trying to change a construct of how my horse moves, I actually need to let him practice quite a bit. But I have to make sure I let his tissues recover between sessions. So I'm not necessarily going to use that aid every single day. But I am going to use it more than once a month. Like using a training aid once a month is a colossal waste of time. Nobody's going to learn from that, right? So I'm going to have to dial it in of like maybe 3 days a week is my sweet spot, maybe 2 days a week, maybe 4 days a week. But like I have to make sure the tissues have enough recovery between. I always want to keep my intensity low with training aids. This is not the time to go trotting faster, cantering more, really elevating their heart rate. Like this is the time when you're like, I'm trying to teach your body how to bend and push off and stuff differently. So the intensity is going to be low. The complexity of the exercise is going to be simple. But I'm going to be very specific with how you use yourself. Speed makes things complex. So when you use training aids, keep your speed slow. Do much of your work at the walk when you're trying to retrain your horse how they move. Like walking is a very, very beneficial gait to a horse. And a lot of times we push to trot and canter far too soon. I think Pangloss, I should have just for fun added it up. I mean, he spent hours walking on the lunge line, like just walking. 5 minutes to the right, 5 minutes to the left. I would do sessions on him that were 30 minutes long. We'd change direction every 5 minutes. And to this day, he does that once a week. But he was doing it, 4 times a week at one point. And then slowly, as his body could handle it, I added in other things and more riding and such, and then cut back the lunging. But he still is on that program once a week for maintenance, and will probably do that for the rest of his performance life. Duration. When you're working with a training aid and trying to change how your horse moves, you're trying to alter their motor control and change kind of their nervous system and how they fire things. And you don't want to drill that too much. So you need to make your sessions shorter or allow a lot of rest breaks. Like in the example I just gave, I was every 5 minutes, I was stopping and changing direction. And when I stopped, I would just I would unclip all the aids so Pan could like move himself around, and we would just hang out there for a few minutes, just letting his body recover. It's like if you go to the gym and you're lifting weights between sets, you're just sitting there. It looks like you're doing nothing, but you're actually doing something really important because you're letting your body recover. Okay, let's talk a little bit about why in January of 2022, I had him in Vienna reins, and then in the video in April, he was in side reins. And this gets to where you always have to evaluate if your training aid is doing what you think it's doing. So when I was working with him in January and I put side reins on, I did not get any significant change in his body, right? Because it's that idea of that 3-point of control. My third point of control wasn't making an effective bend to the bow. All he was doing was kind of flexing at the pole and putting his nose behind the vertical. But if I looked at how his neck was shaped, if his shoulders were lifting, if his back was lifting, and if he was at all getting any posterior tilt of his pelvis, the answer was no. He was just sort of the same with now a bent head. And so that told me that the stiffness in his body was basically too stiff. The side reins weren't an effective point of control to help change that stiffness and activation in his body. So I switched into the Vienna reins, which Vienna reins they're kind of like draw reins. Same concept, where they attach underneath the surcingle and then go up through the bit and then attach back to the saddle or the surcingle. And they require a horse to lower their head a little bit to have enough like freedom in the rein. And so in lowering his head, I was able to better activate those core muscles that lifted his back and got some posterior tilt. I kept them quite loose, right? You just need, it's a little like Goldilocks bed. You've got to find just the right amount of pressure. Too much is bad. Too little is a waste of time. There's a sweet spot in there. And again, keep your intensity low. Don't add speed to the mix, right? Don't add speed. And so we walked and walked and walked and walked. This went on for weeks. And then eventually he learned, and he had the strength and kind of habit and fascial looseness to be able to go on to side reins. And so this is what he looks like in April. Sorry, I'm doing my own video. It's not the greatest videos. But now he's in loose side reins. But it is much like he can lift his back, tip his pelvis, lift his shoulders. And those side reins are perfectly sufficient point of control to help bend that bow. I don't need like the extra pull of the Vienna rein. You always want to use as little as you can get away with.